Me dice producción que ya tenemos al invitado que vamos a poner en pantalla en un momento, y es interesante e importante que sepan que Tom Lee y otra mujer que se llama Cameron Dodson, que también la vamos a tener en el programa de televisión, están encontrados. De eso les voy a hablar después. Tenemos a un personaje muy importante hoy en lo que es la tribuna de la entrevista del día. Es un amigo realmente que ha establecido una amistad conmigo por muchísimo tiempo. Su nombre es William Kelly, como lo ven ahí en pantalla, y William es, para que ustedes tengan, quien impulsó esa designación que se llama Caia, desde el 2014 hasta el 2024. Le voy a hacer una cantidad de preguntas a William, que es un experto en todo lo que tiene que ver con el tema de los alternativos, de cómo nos estamos comportando en ese sentido, y obviamente le damos las gracias de que se haya tomado la oportunidad de estar con nosotros en la tribuna. William, how are you? How you doing? Happy Friday. We are very happy to have you here. And just in order to start, we would like your opinion about the state of the markets and the alternative investments in your own words. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Victor, and it's great to be here, and thanks for inviting me on. So the state of the market in the short term matters much less. We all have to take a long-term perspective, and I think there's been a lot of volatility, a lot of noise around tariffs, and geopolitical risk is all over the map. And I think the average investor is going to get very, very nervous. I think you got to go into any period, rosy or not, with a very diversified portfolio, asset allocation that covers a range of risk premia, so that in the medium to longer term, the investment portfolio survives these hiccups. I think the tendency for investors in the short term is to see a period like we've been through over these last several weeks, and we're near correction territory in some of the major indices, is to pull the money off the table, and that's the worst instinct in the world. And Victor, the old saying, the only thing that goes up in a down market is correlation. So if you try to measure how one alternative is doing against, say, public equity or private credit versus public fixed income, you're going to probably see a fair amount of correlation. I still think there are great opportunities in the private market, but for the average investor, accessing it becomes very, very difficult.
William, specifically about that last sentence you mentioned about the private markets, you and I know that there is specific vehicles that are mostly available for what is called the accredited investors. So they have a criteria that, in this case, when you are in the US, you have to be qualified by certain criteria in terms of asset and that knowledge. But obviously, there is some opportunities for the more, let's say, a big investor than for the smaller one. That situation seems to be changing, and I would like you to explain a little bit how is that going in terms of the what we call the retailization of the market in the alternative investment. And in the other part, William, one of the other things that we commonly hear as a professional is that if you want to have any vehicle that have liquidity, you are attempting to have returns. I would like to know if you can explain to the audience why it's better to have illiquid vehicles for the long midterm than have liquid vehicles. And also, at the end of the day, what do you think is your vision for the regular people to start grabbing opportunities in markets like the private market, as you mentioned, please?
So it's two sides to the same coin, Victor, and I look at myself and probably you as examples where we have to manage our own retirement. We have to pick the investments, we have to manage longevity risk, we have to manage volatility, we have to manage geopolitical risk, and we don't know if we're going to live until 70 or 110, and these are very, very complex inputs, and the average investor is not equipped to do this. In the good old days, we had a defined benefit plan. Somebody took care of that for us. So if capital formation is happening more and more in the private markets for equity, and yield is more and more in the private markets in the form of private debt, why should we not have access? So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, it's very, very complicated. To try to get the apparatus around due diligence and manager selection is very, very difficult to do. And the knock and maybe the beginnings of this retailization was 2022, where the 60-40, which most of the investors that you and I know and the average retail investor really thinks about asset allocation, 60% equity, 40% bonds, that drew down 17% in 2022. Very, very frightening for the end investor. And that's when the siren song of the 60-40 is dead to me was parroted by many of the large asset managers because they had other product to sell. But if you look at what happened after 2022, 2023, that same 60-40 index up 17%. Last year up 15%. On a rolling 10-year basis, it returned about 6.8%, very much in line with the 10-year averages. But the average investor, and Victor, if we can teach them nothing else, is to have a diversified portfolio and stay in the game. And I see these gap analyses done all the time. Morningstar does it annually, where they look at what the average investor has returned versus what the fund has done. And on average,
so basically, I'm gonna put exactly that slide that you mentioned about Morningstar, because obviously I will add your explanation specifically on that slide that is extremely important for all of us.
Yeah, this is actually, it's very simple, but also very important, Victor. And you can see at the very bottom, it's 1% a year that the average investor market times their way away from, because they want 100% of the upside return, 0% of the downside. So the moment they see some volatility and some red numbers, they come out. And then they typically come in at the wrong times as well. And it's costing them, as you can see, on average across all asset classes at the very bottom, a little over 1%. If you look at the proxy for probably hedge funds, that's the non-traditional equity, it's twice that, 2.3%. So if I could say to the investor, just stick with the 60-40, but do me one favor, stay fully invested. And you could see study after study after study, if we take the time to explain this, I think the end investor could easily pick up low-hanging fruit of 100 basis points. So on the average, I mentioned the 60-40 is up 7, the investor's probably getting something closer to 6. So closing that gap by education and trying to really convince the client about long-termism is hard. But what do we as an industry do? We say, you know what, come into the deeper end of the pool. I have private credit for you. I have infrastructure for you. I have hedge funds for you. And I'm not going to wrap them away. David Swenson, who ran Yale's endowment for many, many years until he died very recently, he didn't care about liquidity. He wanted his money locked up for as long a period of time as possible. But yet for the retail investor, we're using interval funds or ETFs or 40 Act funds to create these buckets of liquidity, which are return leakers. So to sum this up, Victor, you look at that 1% delta at the bottom, what the fund is actually doing and what the investor is giving up. If I said to you as an investor, hey, come over here, private equity, and you can see this in the Caia reports, Cambridge Associates, they'll typically say private equity is going to give you 5%, 500 basis points better than public equity. So put 20% of your portfolio into that. That's an extreme example, but it makes the math work. 20% into something earning 5% more is 100 basis points. So in order to just simply say to the investor, stay fully invested, instead, we're doing something so much more complex, which is trying to convince them they should put 20% into private equity, find the best performing manager, put it in the right vehicle, and after fees, they're going to end up with that 20% with 100 basis points. They're at the same place. So I'm saying, let's start with some basics. Let's start with basic education and really talking to the investors about long-termism. And once they get some of these basic concepts down, I think there are opportunities in the private markets.
Listen, William, give me just 1 second, 30, 45 seconds, so I can explain them a little bit in español, because it's a lot of information.
Yes.
Lo primero que nos está diciendo William es indudablemente que a veces observamos estas caídas del mercado como las que estamos teniendo y salimos despavoridos sin empezar a pensar en el comportamiento geométrico positivo de los mercados en el largo plazo. Eso ya lo sabemos. Pero otra de las cosas que nos habla, aparte de que él entiende que todo el proceso pasa por la educación de cómo estos vehículos funcionan, los fondos de private equity, los fondos de cobertura que son los hedge funds, el nombre de los fondos de infraestructura y los fondos de capital de riesgo que son los venture capital, es que existe esa, digamos, barra que impide a los inversionistas individuales ir hacia allá, pero todo eso empieza a cambiar en la medida en que los grandes manejadores de dinero están observando cómo le entregan instrumentos a estas personas. Sin embargo, hay que tratar de tener la mezcla excelente entre la capacidad de accesar el dinero, que es la liquidez, y la capacidad de tenerlo creciendo a largo plazo, porque cuando entregas mucha liquidez, sacrificas la exposición hacia lugares que en el largo plazo, cuando se le quita el ruido que tenemos en los mercados, tiende a darnos dividendos. William, let me ask you another question which is extremely important. What is your statistical numbers for the growth of the alternative in, let's say, Spain, in Latin America, and the US? Let's say the people that actually have something to do with the Hispanic bloc, because I know Caia, which is recently one of the associations that you've been leading for quite a few years, have some sort of chapter in Spain, in several countries in Latin America, and obviously pretty active in Miami, which is where the bulk of the community in Hispanic in the US is living. Please give us some sort of update on that, please.
Yeah, so our reach into the LATAM communities in South America, Iberia region, in Europe, and certainly Miami too. I've gotten to meet some very, very smart investors and many other professionals, including you, Victor. I feel very blessed by that. But the message Caia tries to bring forward is, do your due diligence, do your homework. There is opportunity on the private market side, and probably rich opportunity. If you look at anybody that's made a fair amount of wealth, myself included in the course of our careers, they've done it by starting a business, private capital, private equity. Elon Musk, he became a billionaire from the many companies he started up. So with the right formula, with the right partner, with the right investment, there is opportunity there. But it's a minefield because the average returns and the gap of performance is very, very wide, but the average returns don't look that much different than the public market proxies. So I think the outlook is quite bright. I look at some of the things I've learned in parts of LATAM where you've got an institution doing the manager selection on behalf of the end retirees. So I can decide who I want to place my money with, and they're doing the asset allocation, the manager selection, the due diligence on my behalf. I think that's an excellent model. It's kind of like what Australia does as well. So we do have to be very, very careful. I think alternatives are poised to probably double in AUM in the period ahead. The secondary market in alts is still very, very small. They're going to have more retail investors coming in that want to have access to some form of liquidity. That secondary market's going to have to grow quite rapidly too. So I think we're in the early stages. I think there's tremendous opportunity there, but we have to do it in a very, very careful and thoughtful way. And Victor, you've heard me say this so many times, we have to democratize education before we democratize product. If we don't do that, it will not end well for the end investor.
William, super happy. And one of the things that I want to applaud you is the energy, the passion. Yeah, we agree with you with the education. We're going to keep bringing you to the program because you are an extremely important asset in order to kind of leading what to do in that important bucket, which is the alternative investment. Happy Friday, great weekend, and definitely we want to hear from you soon. Thank you very much, William.
Thanks, Victor. Cliente primero.
Gracias.